Welcome to the November 15th, November monthly meeting of Physicians for National Health Program Washington chapter. We're here in Washington State, most of us, although I'm not sure if everybody is here. Some people may be joining from elsewhere. At least where I live on Mercer Island was once the land of the Snoqualmie Indian tribe that had two small villages on the island many years ago. And most of this area had various tribes of the Coast Salish Indians, lived off the salmon and other good things that they could hunt and catch. What's next, David?
Why don't we just go around and introduce ourselves? I'm David McClanahan, coordinator for PNHP Washington, live in West Seattle.
And I'm Sherry Weinberg, the president, live here on Mercer Island.
Hi there, I'm Craig Garver, a retired neurologist in Wenatchee, Washington, on the east side of the state.
I'm Ronnie Shore, a retired pharmacist in Seattle, president of Healthcare for All Washington, co-chair of the steering committee of the coalition, Healthcare is a Human Right.
Yeah, I'm Danny Iorio. I'm a retired family nurse practitioner. I'm the vice president of PNHP Washington.
My name is Munif. I am a second-year medical student at Pacific Northwest University. And yeah, that's here in Yakima.
Chris Curry, retired RN, member in Spokane, Washington.
I love the fact that one of the nice things about Zoom meetings is we've got people in Western Washington, the middle of the state, and Eastern Washington attending. That is nice.
I'm Betsy McCarthy. I'm a partly retired family physician. Worked most of my career at PacMed in Seattle. I'm in Seattle.
I'm Natalie Kokonis. On stage, I'm fond of introducing myself as Nat K, the Science Gay. I have been a medical student for 2 years now. I'm an MD PhD student, and I hope to do my PhD in public health genetics, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
John Carney, a second-year medical student and board member with PNHP Washington. I guess president lead of the UW chapter of Students for National Health Program.
Hello, Kathleen Myers, board member, retired dentist.
Hello, everyone. My name's Cole. I'm a second-year medical student along with Munif, PNWU here in Yakima, and I was fortunate enough to be able to go to the conference this last weekend as well, which is fantastic.
Hi, I'm Jolie, a fourth-year medical student at University of Washington, SNaHP political advocacy co-chair, and I'm also a regional AMA delegate. So I was at the House of Delegates, sadly, instead of being at the AMA meeting this weekend.
Hi, I'm Rich Legue. I'm a retired physical therapist, and I'm the secretary of the board of the Healthcare for All Washington Education Fund.
Hi, I'm Shannon. I live in Bellingham, Washington. I'm just a concerned citizen, a strong supporter of single payer, and I hope to see it in my lifetime.
I love it. We have got people from all over the state. That's really nice.
I'm Hugh Foy. I'm a retired general surgeon. Spent most of my career at Harborview after being at PacMed for 5 years, and I'm a board member of PNHP and just started as a board member for PNHP National.
In charge of the Western region. Well, I think the first thing we should do is just take a minute to acknowledge the passing of one of our former presidents and board members, Don Mitchell. So Don was an important part of the chapter right from the start in 2005 or 6 when we first started it. And I'm pretty sure he was a president for at least a while. Yeah.
And I remember having meetings at his house before he sold it and went to Horizon House.
Anyway, he got his undergraduate at Stanford and then went to Harvard Medical School and went into the U.S. Public Health Service. And according to the obituary, he traveled all over the world with the U.S. Public Health Service. In fact, I think one of his first kid was born overseas. Forgot to mention he met his wife Pam at Harvard, and he came back to Seattle, and he was in private practice in the Renton area, and his specialty was pulmonary medicine. And he did a lot of volunteering, for PNHP, Habitat for Humanity, and many, many more. As I said, he was active in the early days of PNHP Washington and president, and he was known for his witty comments and dry sense of humor. And he retired from active practice in the year 2000 and spent his last days in Horizon House. He passed away November 1st. Actually, the family asked for contributions to be made to PNHP Washington and Habitat for Humanity and Plymouth Healing Communities and some other charity work he was involved in. So he's having a celebration of life on November 18th at Horizon House.
Can I add one other memorial? A state healthcare leader, Sherry Appleton, passed away on a cruise. She died at age 80. They don't really know the exact circumstances of her life, but she was out having fun, which is a good thing. Sherry was a sponsor of the Washington Health Security Trust, a single payer bill that Healthcare for All and a number of other organizations were a part of in Washington State.
Wow, I hadn't heard. I, of course, have met her several times. So when was it that she passed on?
It was a week, maybe 2 weeks ago.
A couple other notable passings this past week. One was Sig Hansen. Sig Hansen was the chief of orthopedics at Harborview, and
oh yeah,
he basically brought modern orthopedic surgery to North America from Austria and Germany. The whole concept of open reduction internal fixation, particularly in traumatic and even contaminated fractures, was thought to be heresy until Sig heard about it and studied it in Europe and brought it to the United States. So he is truly a pioneer and was a mainstay and mentor to many. The other one who passed, another Harborview former chief, was Abe Bergman, who was chief of pediatrics. Most notable thing I think in his career was he was one of the initial sponsors and proponents of flame-proof sleepwear for children. But Abe was a faculty member for many, many decades and just passed away this last week at the age of 91.
I remember him well as a pediatric resident. He was, and one who did spent a considerable amount of time at Harborview. I knew him well, so I'm sorry to hear of it. So what's next, David?
There was just a tremendous amount of stuff that was covered at Friday, Saturday, Sunday in Atlanta. And I thought the easiest way to do it would just be to go through the agenda from each day and highlight the workshops, and people who are there can just say something about it, and recruited me to do some video of some of the workshops. So didn't have a chance to go around as much as I wanted to, but people who are here tonight can say something about at least half of those. So I'll put up a timeline in a second. Real kudos to John Kearney for getting all the students there, because we got a lot of compliments for all the students that we brought there. There was 9, John, was it?
The grand total was 3 medical students from University of Washington, 5 from Pacific Northwest University in Yakima, and then I believe it was 4 or 5 board members or PNHP Washington members.
Well, you made us look good.
Yes. And it was really nice to have the opportunity to meet with the SNaHP members who I knew by name, but not by face or talking. So that was really nice to have that chance. And I'm so glad you all came there. And I hope it solidified your dedication, because it's going to get tougher, as you notice. I like to think we had the white hairs and the students there, that the middle section of physicians was notably not there. And it's a busy time of life. They're under a lot of pressure and they just don't have time to take a weekend off and go somewhere else in the country for a meeting. So that was a real theme of the overall meeting, was that the PNHP members were mostly quite senior, and the students were plentiful and lively and active, and it made it a much better meeting.
I think there were over 100 students there. So anyway, you guys can see this Friday sessions, which were really before lots of people got there who came on Saturday. But anyway, there were workshops, and it was more focused on SNaHP and called leadership training. And there were some workshops there. First one, transform your chapter's people power into effective action. The description that went along with it was tips and tricks from successful PNHP chapter leaders on growing your chapter, skills to recruit new members, mobilize existing supporters, and take on bold projects. What has worked and what hasn't in diverse political environments. Anybody here attend that? Now, narrative change and building relationships with elected officials. The second workshop is described as develop skills to effectively communicate with lawmakers and forge strong relationships to move single payer forward. Own ability to make the ask, tell your story, and educate the public and media. Sherry, you attended that one?
Well, sort of. I was only there for part of it, and I was badly in need of a nap, having been up all night on the plane. The main reason I went there is I wanted to be sure that they understood where particularly our federal officials are coming from, that they are very well insured and they don't really understand what we're talking about. And I didn't get much of a chance to get that out, but that was what was on my mind. They did talk about meeting, trying to meet with, when you meet with elected officials, try to listen and be there where they are, come from where they are, not to just storm in and tell them what we want them to do. I think that was the major take-home thing that I got from that.
I was also able to attend that, and I agree with what Sherry said. I got a lot of the same messaging. I think another thing, this was kind of reiterated on Saturday, is they emphasized the idea of telling stories and trying to gauge what, the politician you're working with, what their voter base is kind of looking for, rather than throwing facts and figures at them. Those have a harder time at changing minds.
I'm thinking surely these Congress people and senators have heard these stories from their constituents, and for them to think just because they have a great insurance that everybody has it, that doesn't fly. I mean, they've heard the stories, I'm sure.
The point is, it's a lot harder to get people who aren't sort of already in our camp, already aware the way we are. When the insurance companies treat them wonderfully, it's harder to get them to understand why we want to kick out the insurance companies and have the government run the system.
Yeah, treat them wonderfully with money, I think, is probably the biggest problem. But anyway, I wasn't there, so.
Okay, next workshop, introduction to direct action, agitate, educate, organize. According to the description, includes sit-ins, walkouts, street theaters, banner drops, blockades, guerrilla gardening, whatever that is, and more. Introduces tools, strategies, and examples to point the spotlight on injustice, delegitimize oppressive structures, and interfere with business as usual using people power. Direct action raises awareness, radicalizes, educates, empowers, informs, and gets the goods. So, Cole, you were at that one, right?
Yes, I was at that one. And I was not able to take many notes on that one just because it was pretty interactive. So we went through just some history of times that direct action has been successful and how it was implemented. It was an interesting workshop. There was a lot of it was just very much on the kind of practical stuff on how to go about organizing direct action, and less when it might be more effective and when it might not, which was something that was more what I expected, quite honestly. Just a lot of like running through, making sure you have your buddy, and just like in the protest system, just what the, or in a direct action, what the various roles are. So just like the coordinators, health team, green hats, all of that sort of stuff.
Hey, Natalie?
Yeah, I was over there too. So I think that there were a bunch of really interesting dynamics to that one. Perhaps the most relevant and noteworthy things were discussions of, I think they had a picture of Dolly Parton's 9 to 5 in the presentation, and they talked about how the media representation of the problems with, in this case, healthcare, makes a huge impact on how people, I guess, address and are willing to speak up with the problems. They talked about Mr. Rogers and how he had a Black person on his show sitting in the pool with him, and how big of a deal that was when that happened. And they also broke down the individual ways that people are engaging in direct action. And while it is important for you to consider the PERLI acronym, which stands for physical vulnerabilities, emotional vulnerabilities, arrestability, roles, loose ends, and yes or no, whether or not you're ready to move forward with this when you go do the direct action. And they talked about the types of direct action, like points of intervention, which is to say areas that can be intervened in or interrupted in. Points of production, so where stuff is made, like for example, where prior authorizations are sent out. Points of destruction, where stuff hurts people, which is to say the decision-making boardrooms where people decide, oh yeah, we're going to deny endoscopies as a matter of course, just reflexively. That boardroom is a point of destruction. A point of consumption would be sort of hard to describe because it's about buying the things, but there are waves of doctors that are deciding not to accept healthcare, not to accept insurance anymore, which is not the solution, but it's a solution people have been trying. Points of decision, which is influencing policy. Like, for example, the organization ACT UP during the HIV crisis bought lots of flowers and sent them to Fauci at the time. Points of assumption, so sociocultural levels. A lot of people, I think, assume that we have to have a for-profit healthcare system, and we don't. I think addressing that assumption is important. And then that brings us to the point of opportunity, which is essentially a hardcore calendar date that everyone is focusing on that may or may not be orbiting around the topic. The example that we used was MLK canceled his Sermon on the Mount because of Israel's war crimes at the time, and he drew national attention to Israel's violation of the Geneva Convention. So it was a pretty big deal. So that's what I got out of it.
Rooted in radical change, organizing, advocacy, and mobilizing sounds kind of similar, but it's described as discussion of organizing tactics and strategy and how it relates to the movement for national health insurance. Panelists share their experience in building a base and intentionally developing strategy to methodically move a campaign along with a special focus on lessons learned from the labor movement.
Yes, so this I managed to get a little more in the way of notes on. So this was done with, so we had Andy Hyatt and Richard Bruno for this one. And this really kind of centered around Andy's experiences, member of the CIR union leadership. And that was kind of the example that we went through. And the focus there was just organizing within the institutions that we're embedded in. So for those of us who are in various medical societies or within your place of work or school, just trying to use those institutions in the framework that is already there and changing people's perceptions within that framework so that you're no longer one person, you're a much larger organization that people are going to listen to. And then the OMA model, which is organizing, mobilizing, and then activism. The whole idea there just being that mobilizing is not in and of itself self-sustaining. You can mobilize, you can have a protest, but you need organization to form self-sustaining structures. The example there was the CIR union. Andy spoke a lot about the way that he was able to get into the leadership at the union, just because they had not been terribly active prior to that. And just it was very slow and one person at a time, but managed to build a coalition just by speaking one-on-one with a whole bunch of people and just getting their contact information. And then when the time came, was able to use those resources.
So CFR is a committee of interns and residents, right?
Yes.
All right. Now, SNaHP session, building strong leaders and powerful SNaHP chapters. How will you grow the number of medical students involved in the SNaHP chapter? So that was the focus of it. Anybody attend that one?
I attended that one, and it was with one medical student. Sorry if you hear sizzling in the background. I'm cooking fried tacos. It was with one medical student in their chapter at NeoMed, which is Northeast Ohio Medical School, I believe. And it was an interesting breakdown of how they actually went about forming a structure at their chapter, because it was relatively low key when he started medical school. I think it was only one or two people who were kind of dragging the chapter along, not really doing a lot of direct action. And he talked a lot about how, you can kind of, how actually it was really interesting. We talked a lot about how much of a free structure there is, or how much free reign that we have in forming actual hierarchies and structures and chapters, especially as medical students. Forming, a president, vice president, and really just, shaping and creating roles based on people's skills and availability, as opposed to having predefined roles that you expect the chapter to have up front. And another component of that is of that breakout session, he talked a lot about, some of the things that NeoMed was able to do. Something that I thought was really interesting was actually their work with several other, I think, PNHP or SNaHP chapters in the region in buying up medical debt from debt collectors, which are actually pennies on the dollar when it goes to debt collectors, because they just want to get any money they can as opposed to the full amount. And so they were actually to do a good amount of fundraising and applying for grants, I believe. And they were able to purchase up medical debt of individuals in the region. So there was kind of this very interesting and I think very pragmatic approach to direct action.
Yeah, something like $500,000 they raised, and they paid off like $100 million in debt. It's pretty impressive. I don't have too much to add. I thought the lessons that they learned was pretty informative. For example, they talked a lot about attending local town halls and getting really embedded in local political structures, and then using what you gained there to pass resolutions. They talked about their leadership structure. They kind of had a core group of officers who were very close with each other, who kind of they ran most of the organization, but they also had many other officers in the general student body who they assigned different tasks to distribute the load. I thought it was pretty useful session.
Okay, lessons from House Staff Union organizing, overcoming fear and building power. Cole, anything more to say about that?
This one, honestly, was a bit of an echo of the prior session with Andy. This was very specific to forming a union, it seemed. I don't know how many lessons there were that could be applied to the greater goal of getting universal healthcare. I think all of us SNaHP students were at this one, if anyone has more to add.
Yeah, I know it's really interesting, maybe doing residency and try to implement it, but yeah.
Yeah, it was a really great talk. If anybody doesn't know Andy Hyatt, he's really a fantastic individual. I actually know him going back to SNaHP when I was out in Boston, and he was one of the leads of the Boston chapter of Students for a National Health Program. But then he went on to residency at Cambridge Health Alliance, which is a fantastic community-based hospital in Cambridge, and then off to full practice as a psychiatrist right now. But he's a very dynamic speaker, and this talk was fantastic because he really got into some of the weeds and the stories of when they worked to bring unionization to different residents and unions, different residents and fellows. I think there was a couple of really interesting case studies from, especially the organizing around Massachusetts Brigham residents, house or quote unquote house staff, it was really actually kind of interesting because the administration got wind of their plans to try to unionize, like actually relatively early on, like very early in the stage of their organizing efforts, like when they were just trying to like reach out and have one-on-ones on people, one-on-ones with people, as opposed to, I think traditionally, usually the administration doesn't figure things out until like you actually send them a petition to try to unionize and recognize their unions. So he kind of laid out their experience with that, which was, and some of the quote unquote like pushback from the administration or from the executives at Mass Gen and Brigham. It's actually like kind of comical, some of their efforts in putting videos together and actually hiring this law firm of a bunch of MBA bros that really didn't know too much about like healthcare delivery or things like that, who were trying to like develop messaging around why unions are bad and how it could be like harmful to patients and how it doesn't align with some of the ideals of equity and social justice, et cetera, et cetera. And pretty much, it's actually interesting. Like some of that messaging actually brought more people into their interest of forming a union. So it kind of blew up in their face, and they were able to get a vote to unionize in one of the largest and most prestigious hospital systems in the country. And yeah, just kind of getting into like, he really delved into the stories of like how these things sort of come about, and yeah, he just kind of laid the framework and I think a really great like foundation for other people to like spark their interest in forming a union themselves. So yeah, hopefully a bunch of medical students carry that forward into residency. I know I certainly will be.
We could talk about the PNHP board meeting. Basically, there were 3 staff members and I think 23 board members and advisors. I'm an advisor now, and he was on the board. Interesting thing is kind of a icebreaker is they started going around in the circle. We were arranged in a big circle, and they said, everybody tell 2 truths and a lie about themselves. You had to say 2 things that were true and 1 thing that was a lie about yourself, and everybody around the circle had to try to figure out which was the lie. So there was a whole lot of laughs about that, and everybody got to know each other a little bit better because you could throw out as truths some things that you like to brag about, and then the lie might be an even bigger or something you would like to brag about, but you didn't do. So anyway, and in a smaller meeting, we tried that sometime. The board was focused on membership and fundraising, and there were some goals that were laid out there, like 250 new physician members in 2024. Those are dues paying, and 750 total. That includes students, residents, and other advocates. Contact lapsed members by phone and email. Recruit members who haven't been very active to webinars. And when they show up, new member orientation. Medicare Advantage campaign. Work with 10 chapters to build a strong local base against Medicare Advantage. This is a board goal. Establish a speakers bureau and webinars aimed at Medicare Advantage impacted physicians. More present in medical societies, both national, state, and local. And try to set up PNHP aligned interest groups within those societies. So one of the interesting things that was discussed was how do we balance chapters' desire to work on national, state, and local campaigns? Because if you look at the chapters, most of them, if there's something going on in their state, state bill that is universal, or some might claim single payer, whether PNHP chapters should spend a lot of resources and work on that or just focus on national. Well, I think around the circle, everybody said that's really important to work on state as well as national, but always putting national out as the gold star. Because when you're working on the local level, you meet a whole lot of progressive people that have concerns about healthcare, and we focus is on building collaboration with your local groups. And I think in the Pacific Northwest here, I think we've got a whole lot of respect around the country on how we've been able to do that with our 4 or 5 groups that are working on progressive healthcare reform. And I think, Robbie, your name came up once or twice about PASARA and how important it's been, and the Medicare Disadvantage campaign. A lot of credit for that. You know, and I told them about healthcare as a human right, and 60 organizations or whatever that pay some dues and help support each other. And although their interests might be a bit divergent in some areas, it's still an important place to get to know people and work together. So again, around the circle in the board, everybody more or less agreed on that. I think David Loud had told me before I went about a resolution for Ro Khanna's state-based bill that has just been introduced, and whether PNHP National could sign on in support of that resolution. Phil Verhoff, who's the president of PNHP, spontaneously said he's been approached a few times by Chuck Panaccio to ask if PNHP could sign on, and he said no. But Steve Kimball, who happens to be Phil Verhoff's father-in-law, said that Phil does support the state-based work. So I think we got good idea from across the country that just about every state chapter, and particularly New York is working on their bill. So that was interesting. Now, another question was, how can the national deepen its relationships with local chapters? Thought that the PNHP website, and I spoke to a few people about this, is pretty disorganized as far as if you land on the national website or trying to find something, it's really hard to find it. And another thing that it should have is a calendar where you can easily see what chapters are doing in the way of producing webinars. You know, I think everybody agrees with that, and I've mentioned it 2 or 3 times on national board meetings, but nothing has changed there. Robbie, I did take out that I did pass out the one-sider on leveling the playing field on the one side and Claudia's webinar on the other side. And I talked to Claudia about it when I was there. So she's looking forward to that on December 4th.
In that same vein, I put in the chat a reference for an excellent blog article published this week by Steve Early and Suzanne Gordon on how organized labor is, some unions are caving in to Medicare Advantage. So Robbie and many of the others, I'd recommend that article to all of us. It's a great recap and has a lot to do with the Medicare Advantage push and how it's infiltrating into many different areas. And it's a great read. Just FYI, Boeing SPIA retired engineers were notified 2 weeks ago that without their consent or prior notification, they want to convert all of their retiree health plans to Medicare Advantage. So hopefully the people in New York will be a good precedent. And I've reached out to some of my retired Boeing friends, and they've contacted their union leaders and their benefits leader as well. So we'll see. There were, it was my first board meeting, so my head was pretty much spinning. They had, other than that, the medical societies is quite interesting. Steve Kimball, I would recommend, and I did kind of a deep dive into Steve Kimball and Kip Sullivan's writings that many of you may be interested in health policy should take a look at. Steve is a psychiatrist in Honolulu who got into their state medical society, introduced a resolution to support single payer, and much to his surprise, it was passed, and he was subsequently elected president of the Hawaii Medical Society. So I think that's something we haven't. Sherry's been very active in WSMA, and we'll be very interested, Joelle, in your description of your work at the National AMA Convention in terms of the student-led proposal for support of single payer. I thought it was really helpful to get to know people and to network with people, particularly Richard Bruno down in Oregon and some of the other people from California. Many of you are probably aware that the LA chapters in the state of California, PNHP, have kind of been suspended from the national organization because they're in a major row and disagreement over their new legislation for a state-based program, CalCare and CalCHA, and it mostly centers, as best I can figure out, around having truly single payer versus just another ACA / and I don't like to use the term Obamacare approach, where they let multiple insurers into in the tent, which really does decrease its potential functionality and power to really drive costs down. I don't think I've got any other notes, David, on that on the board meeting. There was one thing that they mentioned, though, about having seminars with students about residency application. Being a recovering program director, I was a program director of the UW surgery residency for 9 years. John and the rest of the students, if you all are interested, I would be more than happy. I've actually got a primer on how to make your residency application more effective that I'd be happy to share with all of you at any time. We've also discussed, I think, Sherry, you got a invitation from Richard Bruno for a regional meeting down in Oregon of the SNaHP chapter there. And I think it was really great to network among the people from Oregon and Washington. I mean, California is a bit further away, but
the meeting you're talking about is a one-payer states organized meeting of getting folks who've been working on getting a plan in Oregon together with folks who've been working on getting a plan in Washington. Both states have had various versions of universal healthcare commissions designed to come up with some kind of a unified plan. And they had a meeting here, I think it was last August, here in Seattle. And then this is sort of a reciprocal, and it's on Sunday, December 3rd. And Richard has offered to come and pick me up at the train so that I can take the train from Seattle to Vancouver, Washington, and be picked up and taken to the site, which is in Northeast Portland.
Okay, we got to move along here. Saturday was the big day, and general sessions kind of dominated. The first one was the usual health policy update, which has, 100 and some slides that are all updated with the latest information. And it's really, we should all have that on our computer if we're gonna go out and give a talk about something, because you can select parts, slides from that show to use for whatever you're doing. So that will be available. It's not available quite yet from the national website, but it will be available. Adam Gaffney, a past president and works at Mass General, gave that talk.
And it's really an excellent review of the year's literature supporting single payer. And I'd highly recommend it. I took a bunch of just pictures of his slides because it took him quite a while last year to get them up on the national website. And I'll see if I can put some PDFs together of that. But it's all the research and data that Adam's kind of inherited, I think, the brain trust laurels from Woolhandler and Himmelstein for the organization, but he does a superb job.
Yeah, it will be available. I just checked the website today, and I talked to people from the national chapter about the national office when it would be available, and they said soon, because it's all together. All they got to do is put it up there. But if you go to the website, there's if you can find the slideshow section, there's a whole lot of slideshows. But in order to see them or download them, you have to have a code. But the code is always the name of the current president, small letters, no capitals. Now it's Verhoef, and he pronounces his name Huff, Verhoef. It's kind of hard to tell by looking at how it's spelled, but it's a Danish name or something. Lots of time was spent on the Medicare Disadvantage campaign, and Ed Weisbach, who's been leading that effort for years now, talked about it. And showed his latest slides. And if you go to a slideshow, you can almost guarantee that Ed put together about half of it. He's really wonderful. He did say level the playing field once, Robbie. I gave him the Basara flyer with level playing field and what that means. And, you know, he was familiar with it. He took it. But I only heard that phrase level the playing field once, although it was what's within it was talked about several times or lots of times during the discussion on Medicare Advantage and stopping privatization. There was a guy, Jay Marcellus, gave one section of that talk, and it's about how to tailor your message to the audience you're talking to, and that was really good. And you can get that from his website, ASO messaging website. Anybody else who was there got some comments on those first two?
Just some takeaways from the ASO talk on messaging from Jay. Just big points there, like just that facts and statistics are persuasion neutral, so they're not an argument in and of themselves, which I don't like, but I think is true. And then the big one for me was just say what you are for and not to adopt the opposition's framing. So instead of single payer is not communism or whatever people are arguing, just forming your own argument instead of trying to negate the opposition's argument. I thought that was really helpful, and that was a fantastic talk.
I should say that I think all of these talks are going to be available via the national website. So it'll just take a little while to get up there. This next one, Building Progressive Power, Lessons from Georgia. I must say that the guy, Kieran Blair, was just an amazing, amazing speaker. Been organizing for years in Georgia. Powerful guy that really took over the audience with his way he talks and what he was saying. Other people that were there have a chance to see that session.
Yeah, I thought it was great. Persistence, I think, was his bottom line. You gotta stay in the game, and you can't let yourself get defeated by negative messaging, and always recenter yourself back to what your mission and what your principles are, and let that continue to impel you in your work. Because as we all know, some of these goals are very long range. They've been difficult to attain, but when he thinks of it himself and to encourage others, he always goes back to his principles and the purpose of why we are all doing this, and let that continue to motivate you.
So the keynote address, that was also a really brilliant, mesmerizing talk. I had a chance to talk to her afterwards to see if she'd be willing to put on a webinar for us out here. And she said, yes, she'd be certainly willing to do that, but she would require an honorarium of some sort. That was maybe the strongest talk during the whole session. Let me see if I can find something about her. President of the American Public Health Association in 2016. And she's got all kinds of credentials that I won't even go into, but that's something we can think about if we want to, if we had an annual public meeting out here, if we had a collaboration of all our local organizations get together, she'd be an amazing person to bring out here like we did in the old days.
David, the title of her presentation was Confronting Racism Denial.
Yeah.
And who is she referring to as far as who's denying racism?
It's out there. People deny racism, look at all.
So just the general public, or she wasn't talking about institutions or insurance companies or any of that stuff?
Well, politicians, people all over the place, they just don't think about it, and they live privileges of being white and so on. And you need to confront the advantages you have and understand the disadvantages other people have. and worked to overcome that. And I talked to her afterwards about, in her talk, she didn't say anything about reparations. And she said, of course, that's part of it, but that's kind of a different topic. And I think she went about an hour of what she was talking about. All right, SNaHP sessions. I didn't go to any of those. Do you guys, did we more or less cover that already?
Yeah, I think that one was a little bit different. I don't remember too much from the SNaHP welcome. I do remember the talk with the next one, SNaHP Plenary, about SNaHP's moment to moving forward. I believe that one had an old friend of mine, Alan Frida, who we were both involved with the political advocacy team for the National Students for National Health Program. And she talked a little bit about kind of direct advocacy and getting out of her comfort zone, because she wasn't doing too much advocacy as an undergrad, but when she really got into like policy and political organizing in medical school, actually, and kind of getting into the reading and learning about policy and the inequities in the United States, and how that kind of, she didn't say this, but it kind of radicalized her and pushed her to do things that she might not have done before. And she just shared, some of her experiences, and talked about encouraging other students to kind of step out of their comfort zone and really learn how to really use the privilege that they have in medical institutions to advocate for, systemic change, including around health policy. And, for her in particular, it was, going to Chicago for the National AMA meeting, which I believe was in 2019, and doing direct action that, could have invariably blown up in her face and could have had negative repercussions on her career. But it was actually just organizing. It was just advocacy. And so she really tied it back to her individual experience in going through SNaHP, and now she's in residency, I believe, in Baltimore. So she's just outside of DC.
Hey, opportunities for federal action. Alex Lawson had 2 workshops on that subject, and he's always a great speaker. If you've seen him from Social Security Works, that there's a Zoom conference every month that Sarah hosts, that you should get on. You should get onto that if you can, because you learn a whole lot about what's happening in Washington, D.C. and possibilities to move things forward, particularly on Social Security, and Medicare is tied pretty closely with that. And again, I'm hoping that I did some video of this, so I'll make, and I'm supposed to edit it and give it to the National to, distribute, but I had a little trouble with my computer editing that at this point in time. But anyway, that'll be worth watching. I'm not sure what the advantage of stealth advocacy was about. This is one I wanted to go to, but I couldn't because I was doing the video for Alex Lawson's moral injury. What is it? How to talk about it? And what the hell does it have to do with PNHP? Lots of you saw that article that came out a month or so ago about moral injury and how physicians and other providers, have a moral injury to themselves when they get pressure from the insurance companies not to provide a service that they know is needed by that patient. So it adversely affects the patient, but also the providers who are forced not to do something they know is indicated. I think that's something that we need to play up, learn more about, and talk more about. Raised hand, Natalie?
Yeah, I was at the moral injury thing. I think that what really blew me away about it is it represents a sort of flipping of the script in the context of how I think replacing the phrase burnout with moral injury means that we no longer make it about the, it's some weakness of some individual. I mean, we get this a lot in medical school, right? Like, we got to be tough. And I think that making it about moral injury, about illustrating the fact that we are asked to act against the self-interest of our patients, that we are asked to prioritize profit over our patients' lives and our patients' livelihoods, and our own joy in medicine, our own joy in solving the puzzles that got me interested in medicine in the first place. It names the villain in a way that we saw in a lot of other workshops, where the whole point is not to make it about how the system is broken, but about how this is breaking the system, and we are a part of the system that is being broken. And it is, I think, it's really freeing to know that this is not my fault, and that we can do something about it. So that was my favorite part of that.
Anybody else on that? Because I think we should be talking about this more and more as we move it into the coming year.
Yes, I think it's a very important issue that other physicians in other countries don't face by and large.
And to add to that, I also think this is kind of a little bit more pragmatic, but this could be also a great tool in terms of recruiting, kind of middle-aged physicians, younger physicians into PNHP and SNaHP. Whereas, like, I think historically we've been kind of framed as, historically PNHP has been an organization about a single policy, right? But I think we can actually flip the narrative a little bit and just be like, no, we're actually an organization for systemic change, because we refuse to be complicit with the subjugation and oppression of individuals based on their insurance status, or allowing insurance companies to override and overrule clinicians' decision-making in terms of what's best for their patients. So that could be a good recruiting tool as well, and talk, possibly that could be a good topic for a future talk.
Okay, well, building a national movement through state and local organizing, Hugh and Cole went to that one. And I saw some video of it. I think, was I there doing the video? Anyway, I mentioned before that we had talked at the board meeting about this issue of state and local organizing. So you guys want to describe what went on in the workshop?
All right. Yeah, this was a super interesting one. Just from my perspective, this is something that I have very conflicting thoughts on, because obviously building a movement is great no matter where it happens, but then there's the concerns about diluting resources and attention. And I think a lot of what I got out of that was just that working at the local and at the state level is also contributing to work at the national level. So whether that be like state representatives that end up being elected to Congress, being able to get that on their radar and get them on your team early on, super helpful. And I found just the kind of state by state differences in how organizations were going about that. Different PNHP chapters was quite interesting there as well. Seems like everyone really had a kind of a different story to tell.
Well, it was moderated by Ollie Fine, who's the president of the New York Metro chapter, which is by far the biggest chapter, and I think it's got 3 staff people, and a bunch of medical schools, and they're working on the New York Health state bill for several years now, I think. Did he say what he thinks the prospects of that are now?
I think they said that it was looking the most promising and they didn't go too much into the specifics on that, but said that just out of any currently that is the closest.
Yeah, he seemed cautiously optimistic about it. And they're obviously very active, but he just talking about fighting the state and national politics in order to keep it moving. Actually, Duhan she's an OBGYN resident who went to medical school in New Orleans and has now moved on. And she talked about it mostly through the lens of reproductive rights issues, given her specialty. Hank Gorhus is from Maine, and his modus operandi was mostly through networking with their state legislature, their state medical society, and then their U.S. representatives. And he said one of the advantages they have in Maine is that the majority of the population lives within a 1-hour drive of the capital. So it's a small, tight community, and they were able to gain momentum due to that fact. And he personally, and I think he was also a president of the Maine Medical Society at one time, you know, it sounded like almost monthly visits to the Capitol and just personally lobbying their state legislators. And then I just told the story of how mostly it was a David McClanahan fan club report of how David and his colleagues, Ronnie, you being one of them, and Robbie as well, putting together a consortium of local organizations from all aspects of life into the consortium of healthcare as a human right, and how that was very effective rather than concentrating on our differences and fighting among ourselves, but having a more cooperative, unified movement focusing on our mission. I also described the work that has been done with Pramila Jayapal, many of starting with attending neighborhood fundraisers in her initial campaign, but staying in touch with her as she has progressed in her career, and encouraging her and educating her about the issues around single payer, and also the story of how David McClanahan was able to enlist the support and help of Kip Sullivan and Steve Kimball in fine-tuning her bill, particularly in terms of some more wonky funding issues about capitation and capital budgets for her new bill, which is also incorporated into Sanders' new bill as well.
That's global budgets and against value-based payments. Those were the two things that, you know, we kind of said that she definitely needed to have that problem ruled out of her legislation, which really is the best legislation out there right now, her Improved Medicare for All bill. And I think Robbie, you or Jeff Johnson has her personal phone number, right? So we've been lobbying her on other issues like ACO REACH, I think. And
the bill does have a number now, and we'll get that to David so he